How's everyone doing today? Good. Good? Wonderful being here. Thank you very much, Pastor Jim, for having me in. I appreciate it. And he kidnapped me when I was 2 years old. I didn't find my mother until I was 33. And all through my life, I had my father controlling me, lying to me, to keep me away from my mother, who, by the way, was not such a bad person, I've learned. My father kidnapped me, and my mother never saw her little boy again. My father drove over 1,000 miles from my home, and for the next 6 years continued to relocate at least every year in order to keep me hidden. My father was a classic example of parental abduction. In her report, Parental Kidnapping, the New Form of Child Abuse, Dr. Nancy Faulkner writes, "The children become emotional dish rags. As the perpetrator tells the child, the victim parent doesn't want them anymore. The victim parent doesn't love them anymore. Or the victim parent has died. The victim parent is getting married, doesn't want them around anymore." But my father's training of hate and deceit was deep and consistent. My cousin tells a story of when I was 4 years old. We were all, the three of us, my cousin, myself, and my uncle, my father's brother, who was a late comer to the McGlothin family. My cousin tells a story of my uncle who loved practical jokes. We're outside playing a beautiful wintry day in the snow. And he yells to me, he says, "Bryan, your mother's coming. She's right over here. She's coming this way now." Can you imagine? I hadn't seen my mother in almost 2 years. My cousin says I immediately dropped to the ground and began burrowing into the snow, throwing tiny handfuls of snow over my back in my desperate attempt to evade my mother. At 4 years old, my father had me very well trained. When I was 8 years old, my father finally sat me down and asked if I knew that Jo, my stepmother, was not my real mother. And I replied yes, as I had 2 older siblings. And I'm sure it came up while we were playing. But I asked my father for a picture of my mother. I had not seen her yet, not to my memory anyway. He told me, unfortunately, he'd thrown everything belonging to her out to the trash for fear that it may be possessed. For as he said, he believed and taught me my mother was demonized. It was 7 years before I spoke of her again. I was 15 years old, and I guess the beginning of my rebellious years, and I told my father I wanted to find my mother. I want to call her. I just want to talk to her. His reply was swift and pointed. "Don't you think if she wanted anything to do with you, she would have already found you?" He had a good point. I was well into my teens. I was almost old enough to drive, but not even a phone call. I was old enough to decide with whom I would live, but my mother, she was nowhere around. In my mind, perhaps it was for the best. After all, she was demonized. At 18 years old, I was preparing for my wedding. But I told my father I wanted to invite my mother to the grand event. Surprisingly, he said he would make a few phone calls. So he left. 45 minutes later, he returned and told me that unfortunately my mother, due to her drug addiction, had been committed to a mental institution. And it was there that my mother died. My mother was gone. I looked deep inside myself, took a deep breath, and with the help of my fiancée, I continued to plan my wedding. Within 60 seconds, I learned my mother had died. I grieved her loss, and I went on with my life. Fortunately, the mother-child bonds are very strong. And I never gave up. I never gave up. I knew at the very least I wanted to find my mother's resting place so I could say goodbye. I never stopped. 1997, I did indeed find my mother. And she was alive. As you can imagine, the reunion was intense and filled with many tears. It was unimaginable, holding my mother for the first time in more than 30 years. I learned also she had searched me for years. She wrote letters to my father begging to see me. He sent her pictures. My mother also searched for me 5 years until she finally gave up. It was just too much for her. She was 26, I was 9, and she attempted suicide, resulting only in damaging her brain, leaving her much as a large child, unable to continue that search for her little boy. Very unique statement from Dr. Ludwig Lowenstein. He continues, comparison was undertaken to identify similarities between alienating parents and cult leaders. The alienating parents were also found to utilize many of the same emotional manipulation and persuasion cult leaders use to heighten the dependency upon them. Likewise, the participants of the study reported many of the same negative outcomes that former cult members experienced, such as low self-esteem, guilt, depression, lack of trust in themselves and others. My father used cultic tactics on me to control me, to keep me from finding my mother.